Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pangolin Podcast. I'm your host, Toby Jermyn. Thank you very much for joining me. In each episode, I've invited a professional wildlife photographer to imagine themselves in a remote location. And along with their camera gear, they're allowed to bring 5 photographs to hang on the wall of their humble dwelling. Now, 4 of these must be their own, and the final image is one they admire by another photographer. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the images as we talk, but for audio listeners on other platforms, there's a link to a gallery in the description. On today's show,
we travelled across to this area on snowmobiles. We had to drive 12 hours across frozen rivers, up and down these river valleys, across mountains, in an average temperature of like -18, and it was tough. I'm never going to forget that day, because when we arrived to the house, the gas heater wasn't working.
My guest today is a wildlife photographer, filmmaker, and Canon Ambassador who has built a global audience by telling intimate animal stories from the forests of northern Sweden. She's best known for her remarkable bond with a family of orphaned red squirrels whose story went viral and turned her passion for nature into a full-time career as a content creator and guide. Today, she combines stills, video, and social media to inspire people to care about wildlife, running an eco-conscious online shop, leading wildlife photography trips, and using her channel to show how powerful a single animal story can be in changing how we see the natural world. It is indeed Dani Connor. Dani, welcome to the show.
Hi, Toby. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I had 10 hours sleep last night, but I'm still quite jet-lagged and exhausted because I've just been in Antarctica for 2 weeks, and now I'm at my parents' in London. It's very chill.
It's very chill, but not quite as chilly, I would have thought.
I don't know. I find the polar regions to be quite comfortable because it's dry cold, and I don't know. I find it actually more cold in London than in Sweden or Antarctica.
Well, yes, we did mention at the beginning of the show that you're based in northern Sweden now, aren't you? And when are you heading back?
I'm heading back in 2 weeks, so I'm here in London for a week, and then I've got a workshop in Iceland, and then after that, I'm back home.
Excellent. Iceland. Well, that's another fantastic destination, one I'm hoping to go to myself at some point. Now, Dani, well, obviously the question we ask everybody at this stage of the proceedings is, we asked you to choose some images, but obviously there had to be, spoiler alert, there's going to be some squirrel images in this talk. But how difficult was it to then choose other images for the show?
I say this quite often, but I find the squirrels fund my wildlife photography. So I do love the squirrels, but I do love photographing all wildlife. Of course, I will always go back to the squirrels, but generally I'd say it was quite easy to pick other images.
Well, whilst we're on the subject of squirrels, let's dive into your first image, please, Dani. Tell us about this image and why you chose it.
So this is 2 baby squirrels kissing or touching noses, and siblings do this to sort of recognize each other. And this was actually one of my first squirrel images that sort of went viral. And this was taken 5 years ago, and I was photographing their mother a lot. She unfortunately got hit by a car, and then I spent 6 weeks in the forest with these baby squirrels, providing them with water and some food, and I just loved this moment of the 2 kissing.
It's a beautiful image. You can understand why it's gone viral. So 5 years ago, so this is mid-COVID.
Yeah.
Did this become, an unexpected COVID project? Obviously in northern Sweden again, wasn't it? And you just moved to Sweden at that point? Had you been there for a while?
I had been there for a couple of months, and I initially went to Sweden to photograph golden eagles. And I was fed up of being in London, so I was working at the Natural History Museum and working for a zoo in London. And I was just fed up of city life. So I initially went to Sweden to photograph eagles, and I was a volunteer for the guy who manages the eagle hide. His name's Connie Lundstrom, and he basically let me stay in his house during COVID. And because I had access to these red squirrels, I was just in the forest with them for 3-4 months, just every day.
I think it's safe to say that you probably had a good COVID then, didn't you?
I did have a very good COVID.
Very good COVID. Isn't it remarkable how COVID has caused a lot of us to sort of pivot in the way that we do things? Had it not been for, well, the decision that you'd made already to go to Sweden, and then was just amplified by the fact that maybe it was difficult to get out further afield in Sweden and you had to work with what you have. I mean, were these squirrels very close to where you were staying?
Yeah, 2-minute walk. I was in the forest, old forest, because
Wow.
a lot of Sweden is plantation. So this is forest that has been left, and there's lots of dead wood, so there's lots of wildlife there. But for me, red squirrels were like really exciting because where I grew up in London, they're obviously extinct. You can find them in parts of England. So for me, it was almost like finding a rare Pokemon. I'd never photographed them. They're super charismatic. They have these long ear tufts and they just have big personalities. And the thing that I really was surprised when I started photographing them is you can easily identify different individuals. And that means you can sort of form bonds with different squirrels. So the squirrel that really changed my career was one called Baby Pear. And I posted a video clip on Twitter of him squeaking, and this was before like TikTok and like super viral content, but it got 16 million views within a few days and I gained 60,000 followers. And that was like, to go from basically 400 followers to 60,000 was just wild.
Yeah. So the squirrels literally, I mean, that is extraordinary. How do you feel about sort of maintaining that momentum afterwards? Did you have this overwhelming sense of pressure now? Like, what am I going to do next? How do I satisfy that demand?
Yeah, sort of. I did discover that more squeaking squirrel sounds was what the internet wanted. So I was trying to get these squeaks, but it was quite amusing because after a few weeks, their squeaks go from like cute, high-pitched baby squeaks to like grunty teenage squeaks. So it didn't have the same viral success. But my next big project was creating a short film about the baby squirrels. And the amazing thing about that film is it got shared on the homepage of Reddit. So I had another wave of followers, and that video is now, I think, almost on 3 million views.
Wow. I also grew up in the UK as well. So all we have the grey squirrels. And then when you're growing up, you hear about these mythical red squirrels. So I completely relate, but I've never seen one. So when you made this film, was that the beginning of your journey on YouTube as well?
Yes. I had made a couple of YouTube videos, but not really seriously. And after this, I started to really focus on YouTube. And I basically spent the whole of 2021 trying to work out how to monetize what I do, because I make all this free content via YouTube videos and photos, but how do I make this an income? And I noticed people really liked the cinematic storytelling videos. So I just focused more on this arty kind of video rather than doing like tutorials or gear reviews.
It is lovely, isn't it? Because it's a sense of escapism for people. Okay, let's go back to the squirrels. So these are 2 orphan squirrels, and you watch them grow up into adulthood. How does family dynamics in squirrels work? Are red squirrels solitary, or do they hang around? I don't know anything about red squirrels, to be honest.
Yeah, so most tree squirrels are solitary. So red squirrels, the babies will spend the first 3 months with mum. Dad is long gone. He's not involved at all. And at 12 weeks old, mum starts to kick them out. And they're tiny at 12 weeks. So that's a big learning curve for them, trying to find food, finding their own drey or like a squirrel nest. And actually, most squirrels don't survive their first year. So only 20% reach their first birthday.
And how old are the squirrels in this particular photograph?
They're around 6-7 weeks.
By this point, you are mum, I presume. How do you look after them?
So I was literally just scattering the food in the forest and providing water. And there were 4. Sadly, after maybe a couple of months, 2 disappeared. I don't know whether they got predated on or whether they didn't make it. But the 2 that I really followed was this squirrel Baby Pear and another one. And that was really it. I mean, it wasn't hands-on. They were old enough that they had teeth that they could eat on their own. I have hand-reared baby squirrels and had to go through the whole process of providing them milk But these, it was quite easy, actually. They were in the forest. I didn't have to take them home or anything. So they were still wild squirrels.
And you mentioned you went to Sweden to go work on photographing eagles. And so suddenly now you've got to learn everything you need to learn about squirrels. Were there resources available to you? How did you find this information?
Well, I studied zoology. I mean, I've never been close to squirrels before, but I knew roughly what they needed. But also I did have I have some friends who are vets, so I asked some advice from them. But initially, this was easy. It was just basically leaving food in the forest for them to find. It wasn't until I actually hand-reared squirrels and had them in my house that it became more complicated and I needed help.
There we go. I think we now learned an awful lot about squirrels. Thank you very much, Dani. Your history in zoology, you didn't think about going into a zoological field, or is this just a natural progression that you find with your wildlife photography?
Well, it's funny you say that, because when I went to Sweden, I had a PhD lined up. So my zoology degree and dissertation was very focused on spider monkeys. And so I thought I was going to go, be a researcher in the Amazon rainforest. And a very different career change.
And now it's squirrels in northern Sweden. Yes, I cannot think of two more polar opposite environments. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on to the second image, please. And tell us a bit about this image and maybe the story behind it.
So this is actually one of the squirrels I hand-reared. Her name was Rue, and she was running towards my neighbour's dogs. And this was when she was maybe 5 weeks old. And a few days before, we had found a mother squirrel hit by a car. So I knew somewhere she had baby squirrels or kits. But my neighbour found Rue and walked to my house to give it to me. And I was in London. So for the first week, I told my neighbour everything she needed to know. I had never hand-reared a squirrel myself. I was doing lots of research, talking to some friends who have hand-reared animals. And after a week, I returned to Sweden and I took over. And for the next 4 months, I had Rue. So for the first 6 weeks, she lived in our house, which was chaos. Climbing up the curtains, destroying sticks. At a very young age, they learn how to cache, so they will take food and put it in the forest usually. But she would cache like under the cushion or in the corner, so we just find random nuts everywhere. Right. And my partner and I, we made a soft release enclosure, so she was outside for a month. And when we released her to the wild, she returned a few days later with aspiration pneumonia. So we had to take her to the vet. Also, bear in mind, it's illegal to have wild animals in your possession for more than 48 hours. So trying to get an appointment at the vet was very complicated. The good thing is throughout this whole process, I had help from 2 red squirrel rehabilitators in Stockholm. So they basically listed me as a volunteer, which is how I was able to take her to the vet. And she recovered, and this is her fully wild after 5 weeks.
Wow.
So Rue was still very friendly with us. So she would show us like mushrooms that she had dried in the forest. She would still play with us. And she did take us to her drey. So as you can see, there's lots of sticks, lichen, and this is where a squirrel sleeps.
So obviously it goes without saying that you should never try and take a wild animal in unless you really know what you're doing and you've got a real support network. But what an amazing story for you to basically save the life of this squirrel. And the fact that she sort of trusted you to bring her into her new wild life as well.
Yeah. I thought I'd just add on the topic of like rehabbing wildlife. Of course, if you find a wild animal, you should always take it to someone who knows what they're doing. Unfortunately, in the whole of my county in northern Sweden, there are no rehabilitators. So we had one option of driving to Stockholm, which takes like 10, 12 hours. Will squirrels survive that? I don't think so. I did try to apply twice and the authorities rejected it because squirrels aren't endangered in my area. So that's why the squirrel rehabs in Stockholm allow me to do it as a volunteer.
It's always a problem that we have. We support an organisation called the Kalahari Wildlife Project in the Northern Cape. Okay. And she has a lot of meerkats. And people think that meerkats are going to make the most amazing pet, and they just do not. They are incredibly violent and they bite a lot, they scratch a lot. But unfortunately, people seem to think, because they've been featured in sort of cutesy films, that they make good pets. But we have to remember that these are wild animals and they're never going to be tamed or domesticated in the way you might do a dog, for example, or a cat or a stray cat. And so this is probably why some of your viewers, supporters and audience have started calling you the Queen of the Squirrels.
Yeah. This name started during COVID, and I don't dislike it. It's a bit weird, but it's fine. I'm happy to be called that.
Well, there we go. You've just been elevated to the nobility by your YouTube audience. I think, well, based on what you've done to promote, red squirrels, I don't know the population numbers in Sweden. Are they a thriving population? Are they a population in decline?
I would say they're relatively stable. I think the biggest issue for red squirrels in Sweden is the plantations and the clear cutting. Red squirrels, they do need trees that are old enough to have pine cones and spruce cones. But if the forest is clear cut, then they've lost their home. And I've actually seen those impacts in Sweden. We had a massive area clear cut, and suddenly there were all these squirrels. There's lots of fighting with the resident squirrels and these new squirrels. In the UK, it's very different because the introduction of grey squirrels has brought in squirrel pox, and this has really decimated the population of red squirrels in the UK. I am an ambassador for the Red Squirrel Survival Trust, so I have made some conservation films from different areas of the UK talking about their story of the red squirrel.
And do you find people now are contacting you, say they want to come and film and photograph with you? Are there reliable places in Sweden to see and photograph red squirrels?
Well, for a Swedish person, they're always very surprised that I've made a career out of red squirrels, because obviously it's almost a pest to them. It's like, it's so normal to see a red squirrel that they just find it like wild that I can make a career out of that in Sweden. And I have noticed, though, in the past few years, there are more places that are offering like red squirrel hides. So I do think perceptions are changing and they're realizing how special they actually are. But I do an annual Patreon workshop where people I know through Patreon come and photograph my red squirrels. So that's pretty cool.
Maybe it's because you're highlighting the squirrels. Maybe that you are the cause of all of these hides going up, and people are leveraging off that. It's really interesting, isn't it? So if you see it every day, it's not exotic. But to you and I, who grew up with the grey squirrels, it is very exotic, and it's sort of mythical, isn't it? So fantastic. Okay, we're going to take a break now, and then when we come back, we're going to see some more of Dani's photographs. Before you go, though, if you enjoy this content and you're interested in learning more about what we do with Pangolin Wildlife Photography, I'm going to leave a QR code on the screen right now, which you can scan to sign up for our world-famous Friday Focus newsletter. Lots of photo tips, gear advice, that sort of thing. So if you're interested, please sign up. So let's take that break, and we'll see you in a second. Welcome back to part 2 of the Pangolin Podcast with my guest today, Dani Connor. Now, we've been talking about squirrels for the last 2 images, as you would have seen. And now we're going to move on to Dani's third image. Dani, would you like to tell the viewers and listeners about this image and why you chose it?
So, it's not a squirrel. It is a wild dog. And this was taken on my very first trip in Zambia 2 years ago. It was my first time in Africa, and this was the target of the trip, really, for me. I've always been fascinated with wild dogs. I love their behaviour, I love their colorations, and I just really like this shot.
They are amazing animals, and I'm assuming this was South Luangwa, Lower Zambezi, somewhere around there?
Yeah, South Luangwa.
South Luangwa. So this is your first trip to Africa. How soon into your trip did you see your first wild dog? Were you one of those people who saw it first afternoon, first game drive, nailed it? There it is.
I reckon it was maybe 8 days into the trip. Yeah. And this was the only day we saw them. But it was amazing because they had just eaten an impala. So as soon as we found them, it was maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Super harsh light. They were all full, big bellies, just sleeping in the shade. And then as soon as the sun went down, they started play fighting against the dust. And I do really like these photos, but this is like the perfect portrait, in my opinion. Like, I do love behavior shots, but this is the kind of photo I'd want on my wall.
They are amazing animals. We're also thinking now what we need to do is we need to have a new Big Five. The original Big Five was a legacy from hunting, where these were the 5 most dangerous things that people had to shoot on foot back in Victorian days.
Yeah.
But there is a very strong case for wild dogs to be making it into the photographic 5. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I never liked this idea of a Big Five. They have it in Antarctica, like a top 5. And I don't like it because all the focus then becomes on these animals.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of the smaller animals, even the herbivores, are just as cool and exciting to photograph, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think there's a real danger that people go on safari as well, and they think, if I haven't seen the Big Five, then my safari wasn't complete. So let's go back to your early career then. So you were going to go off to South America, you were going to study zoology, you were going to look at primates there. And had you always been a photographer, or is this something that came a bit later on?
Yeah, so I started photography now 16 years ago. I wanted to photograph my dog, and my dad had an old camera, so I just borrowed his camera, went to the forest and started photographing my dog. And it became quickly an obsession. And the first years of my photography journey was all about winning youth competitions, selling the kit and buying nice gear. So at a young age, I already had pretty good gear. And when I went on to study zoology, the photography was forgotten about for a few years, just because I was so focused on studying. And then I picked it up, before COVID, basically.
And recently, you were appointed as a Canon Ambassador. When did that start? When did your association with Canon start?
So I have now been a Canon Ambassador for 3 years. Okay. And I was very lucky to have a mentor at Canon about a year before. And I think my sort of big break was when I worked with Canon to do the R7 launch. So I went with Canon to Spain to photograph Iberian lynx and other wildlife. And that created so many opportunities, like different talks with Canon, podcasts. And I think that really helped me become a Canon ambassador.
And is that something that, look, everybody watching this who shoots Canon would obviously like to be a Canon ambassador, and you can't apply. It's not one of those things that you could apply to become a Canon ambassador.
You're invited.
You are invited. There we go.
Yeah.
And yours was because of the work you did. So what advice would you give to somebody, who's passionate about the brand? It could be any brand, Sony, Nikon, anything, to get yourself out there. Have you got any advice for budding photographers?
I definitely think that the main reason Canon were interested in me is my ability to share stories. And, I've created a career out of something quite basic, a red squirrel. It's a common subject. It's been photographed millions of times, but my ability to showcase them as a species and tell their story is really what Canon, I think, is interested in. So I think if you want to be an ambassador for something, working out a way of sharing a story, whether it's through photography, through YouTube videos, or, now everyone is doing short form content, just finding your niche and your ability to tell a story, I think is the main important thing.
I don't know if you noticed a recent trend in YouTube as well. I think that everything was focused so fast towards that, what you just mentioned now, the short form content. But I do see that changing, and YouTube now is starting to say, no. Now we want more storytelling, like you say. We want more cinematic, because in essence, they want to become a streaming service to compete with long form content like Netflix, Amazon Prime, that sort of thing. Are you noticing that as well?
You know what I'm actually noticing? I think the rise of AI has led to an audience wanting real, authentic stories. Maybe it is how the algorithm of YouTube is working, that they're promoting long-form content. But I do think people want to hear and see real people talk about like the real stories and not some AI slop.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's even more important to put yourself out there and be on camera. anybody can now go and, take some nice cinematic footage, put music to it. But I think unless you, as the viewer, know that there is a real person behind that, I think you're going to struggle to find an audience.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's not easy learning how to vlog or be on camera. It takes time. Like, I watched some of my earlier videos and I was just like, it's terrible. Because initially I couldn't talk on camera like easily. So I would have a script and I would basically read a line from my phone and then look at the camera. And that's how I did YouTube, but that's how I learnt how to talk on camera. It takes practice, but I do agree with you that, sharing your story and being on camera is the best way of doing YouTube and social media these days.
And now's the time to do it as well, because YouTube is also helping to promote much more smaller channels. I notice in my own personal feed that it's not just the really big channels anymore that are being offered up to me. And more often than not, I look at a video which has got 55 views and this person's got 8 subscribers. I'm like, brilliant. So now's the time. If you're thinking about doing a YouTube channel, do it. And be a little bit thick-skinned at the beginning as well, because it is mortifyingly embarrassing, the first videos that you do. And then you just got to find your niche and you've got to find your story. And it doesn't have to be super exotic. As Dani has proven, it does not have to be lions and leopards. It can be lots of things. Okay, Dani, we're now going to move on to your 4th image, please. And if you'll excuse the pun, it is the polar opposite to the image that we've just watched before. So please tell the listeners and the viewers about this image.
Yes, so this is an Arctic fox photographed last year in East Greenland. And the Arctic fox is quite small in the frame. There's this lovely blue ice, and this is an iceberg. And at the top of the frame, we have fresh snow.
It's glorious. I love the different colours. I love the fact that you've made the Arctic fox so small in this very dramatic landscape. And you're in East Greenland. You're there for, obviously, Arctic foxes. What else are you looking for on this trip?
It was an expedition to see what we could find, really.
Right.
So we photographed polar bears, musk oxen, Arctic hares, Arctic fox, ptarmigan, and that was pretty much it. This was definitely the wildest trip I've done in recent years. So I partnered up with a great photographer who knows a lot about the polar regions, David Gibbon. And so we planned this trip together. And generally, people don't go to East Greenland in the winter. And this was the end of winter, early spring. And we travelled across to this area on snowmobiles. And it was a trip with guests, but we did arrive about 5 days before guests arrived to prepare the hut where we were going to stay, which is basically an old hunting house, very small.
Right.
And so to get there, we had to drive 12 hours across frozen rivers, up and down these river valleys, across mountains, in an average temperature of like minus 18. And it was tough. That whole day was like, I'm never going to forget that day, because when we arrived to the house, the gas heater wasn't working. So we had to sleep in minus 25 Celsius with a sleeping bag and not much else. Basically, I just shivered the whole night. And the main reason we went early was to prepare this house, but also to create a track for the snowmobiles, so it's easy to navigate and basically get there and back with guests. And we also distributed lots of fuel tanks for the snowmobiles. And then when the guests arrived, they had the easy route, and I actually went with them by taking a helicopter to the hut. But we did make the journey back, which is a whole other story, and that was horrendous as well.
Did they enjoy the trip at least? Did they have a good time?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. There was a lady, this guest, she just, amazes me. She had never seen snow. She came from South Africa, and she decided to go on the wildest expedition as her first encounter with snow.
Okay, so you're in Greenland. You've gone 12 hours on a snowmobile. You're in a hut. There's no heating. At some point, do you think to yourself, I wish I was back home in my heating where I could just walk outside and see a squirrel?
I think that whole day I thought, why am I here? And also, we had hardly seen any wildlife. It is a winter desert. So finding these animals was tough work. We were traveling long distances, using binoculars. The only easy animal was the musk oxen because they are dark figures in a very white, desolate landscape. So you can see them from miles and miles away. And they're a bit nerve-wracking to photograph just because they're so big. They've never seen people. They are hunted in that region, so we needed to be careful to make sure they don't charge at us. But everything else was very difficult to find.
You must feel immense pressure. Literally, I mean, at least they flew in by helicopter, but you've got them there. It's freezing cold. Are you using the snowmobiles, I assume, to go off and look for things to photograph during the day?
The guests were amazing. They were more excited about the experience, about the snowmobiles. None of them were just interested in wildlife. So photographing, the blue ice, the icebergs, the landscapes was incredible. We could fly the drone, and seeing glaciers, on your doorstep was insane. So they were very happy.
It's the adventure, isn't it? We do trips to Svalbard and everyone fixates about polar bears, but actually the photographs that everyone brings back are the more general game, but also the landscapes. And the landscapes are extraordinary in these environments, especially when you have beautiful blue ice like this. Okay, so you have this moment, you have this Arctic fox. Was it curious? Was it alert and then disappeared off very quickly? What was the situation?
So initially when we found it, it looked like it was sort of foraging or looking for food. And so we drove to see if we could get an angle to see if it would stop. And it then walked around the iceberg, sort of towards us. And it was amazing because it stopped right in front of this blue ice and then it was hopping. But the background was the white ice on the bottom right of the image. So it was quite difficult to isolate compared to against the blue ice. So that's why I chose this photo as my favourite.
But it's very difficult to expose for situations like this, isn't it? Because you would have thought, with it being so bright, you have to sort of underexpose. I remember Gus telling me that actually you have to almost think the opposite and overexpose because the camera's desperately trying to underexpose because it sees so much white. But what are your top tips for photographing in snowy environments like this?
So I personally always underexpose because I hate losing information in the highlights. So I was struggling with this a lot in Antarctica last week, that when there's sun, the chests of the penguins become burnt out. So it's better to underexpose just to make sure you've got the information in the whites. So generally in snowy conditions, I prefer to underexpose because you're not really going to lose any information in shadows. And I will have my aperture at the most wide, and I will basically have my shutter speed depending on what I'm photographing.
And I presume there's an element of danger in this as well, not necessarily from an Arctic fox, but you also mentioned you were looking for polar bears as well. So you got polar bears out there. This isn't like you can run back to the refuge of a ship and go, "No, we're all good, thanks. Pull up the drawbridge." We must have had lots of guides and guards and that sort of thing with you.
Yeah, we had a guide with a gun, and he was with us the entire time. But before we arrived with the customers, there was a chance that the house would have been raided by polar bears. So we had to expect that. So we brought acrylic to basically put up on the windows just in case polar bears had gone into the house. But fortunately, the house was all fine and all the windows were intact. We only saw polar bears on one morning. It was 2, and they were about 1 kilometre away. And one looked quite nervous of us. But it looked towards us and then slowly walked away and we didn't see it again.
You must, at some point in the trip, you must sort of pinch yourself and think to yourself, it was only 5 years ago that you were sitting there with a couple of hundred followers on social media, and then suddenly here you are leading an expedition to Greenland.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like, it was always the dream to go to Antarctica when I was young, and now that I've been twice in the past few years, leading workshops is just, wild to me.
And it's not luck, it's the hard work that you put in, but it's also taking a chance as well and putting yourself out there. That's the big step. Like we said before, that's what you have to do. It has to start somewhere.
Yeah, there's luck and there's risks.
Okay, so we are going to take our final break now. And then when we come back, we are going to discuss the image that Dani has chosen by another photographer. But before we go, if you wouldn't mind giving this video a bit of a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. So we'll be back in a second for the third and final part. Thank you. Welcome back to the final part of the Pangolin Podcast with my guest today, Dani Connor, or Dani Connor Wild, as she is better known on Instagram and on YouTube. This is the part of the show where we've invited Dani to choose an image taken by another photographer that she admires, or maybe it's an image that she wishes she had taken herself. So, Dani, tell us about this image. Tell us who took it and why did you choose this one?
So I chose this one by a photographer called Gaiotti, and he is a bit unknown, but I just love how he creates atmosphere in his images. So this is a polar bear photographed in East Greenland during the summer, and it is on an iceberg. And this is sort of the dream image I had for my East Greenland trip. I just love how he's zoomed out and showed the environment, and I love how he's used the rule of thirds, and I love the atmosphere.
It's a really lovely image. It would also work very nicely as a tight crop as well, because it's got that glorious sort of, horizon line at the top of the iceberg. But I think the fact that it's balanced with this, should we call it a shard, of ice on the right-hand side as well, is really beautiful. And you wonder, where is the polar bear going? Polar bears are incredibly popular subject matter. In our photo competition, we get a lot of polar bear entries. There's something really enigmatic about polar bears, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's just because they're known to be this sort of ferocious bear. They are a symbol of the climate crisis, and they're just in these incredible environments. And I'm actually going to Churchill this year to photograph polar bears, and I'm very excited. They're just incredible animals.
And also becoming more and more difficult to photograph. Their rules have changed in Norway, where you have to maintain a distance of at least 500 meters now from the polar bears. So getting shots of polar bears is very difficult, isn't it? Are we gonna struggle? I mean, Churchill's slightly different, isn't it? Because it's sort of land-based and it's a bit more controlled, isn't it?
Yeah, so Churchill, you're waiting for the polar bears to go out onto the sea ice. So the polar bears congregate because they're waiting for the sea ice to form. So that's
Right.
why you're more likely to see them there. But I do think East Greenland is becoming a popular location now for polar bears.
East Greenland in the news for all the right reasons. There we go, as a wildlife photography destination. So before you mentioned him, I hadn't actually heard of Marco Gaiotti. I don't do a lot of social media, but I did go and pop onto his Instagram, and he's got some really stunning images from all around the world and a really unique style, specifically his editing style. Is that what draws you to him?
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued at his editing style, and I actually asked him once if he does editing workshops. He doesn't. But I just love that he also captures the environments so well. It's almost landscape photography with a wild animal in it. He really pays attention to light and colour, and it has this like magical sort of atmosphere about it.
We're going to leave a link to his Instagram and website. And who knows, maybe one day we will get him on the Pangolin podcast and we can chat to him about his editing style. Okay, we've now reached the part of the podcast where I asked my guest to choose where they would like their humble dwelling to be. Where are you going to photograph in perpetuity, Dani? Is it going to be a sub-zero hut in Greenland?
No, I will have to say Sweden. Maybe not the house I currently live in. I would love to have a house in the forest. But yeah, Sweden is home now. I love the forests. I love the winters. I love the midsummer light, having constant daylight for several months. It's just magical.
There we go. So you've got your house, which we would never dare to call your house a humble dwelling, but we're going to have a humble dwelling within walking distance of your house. Done. We shall make that happen. Cool. Dani, it's been an absolute joy having you on the show. Thank you so much. I know that your time zones must be really confusing at the moment. You're not sure if you're day or night, but thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. It's such short notice as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Toby.
Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Pangolin Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As always, I'd love to hear your comments and feedback, so please leave them in the comments down below. And if you don't want to miss the next episode, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Finally, don't forget to sign up to the Pangolin Photo Safari's Friday Focus newsletter. You can do that by heading over to pangolinphoto.com, or you can scan the QR code on your screen now. I look forward to seeing you on a pangolin photo safari soon, and all that's left for me to say is that the Pangolin Podcast was hosted by me, Toby Jermyn, and produced and edited by Bella Falk. Thank you.